Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Dennis Stockman, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Warrant Officer Cherie Thayers. We warmly welcome the veterans of those who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Sergeant Herbert George Finch. Herbert Finch was born on the 14th of November 1895, the eldest of 6 children born to Joseph and Elizabeth Finch. Herbert was the family's only son and grew up with 5 sisters in North Botany in Sydney and later lived in Marrickville. He attended a local public school and later worked as a locomotive engineer, cleaner and fireman. He gained military service by serving in a local militia regiment. Finch enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 31st of January 1916. He trained with the 18th Battalion in Sydney, but in February joined C Company of the 36th Infantry Battalion. Finch sailed from Sydney for overseas service on the 13th of May 1916 aboard the transport ship Beltana. He arrived with his unit in England in July and began training for service on the Western Front. In late November 1916, Finch and the 36th Battalion sailed for France and moved into billets later behind the lines near Armentières on the Franco-Belgian border. They had arrived in Europe just in time for the terrible winter of 1916 and 1917, the coldest in living memory. The men of the battalion had their first experience on the frontline trenches when they moved into the lines near Armentières on the 4th and 5th of December 1916. The first 2 days were relatively quiet, but on the 6th of December, they came under heavy German mortar attack. Finch and the 36th Battalion spent the next week carrying out frontline trench duties, such as manning the defences, strengthening and repairing the trench system, and conducting patrols into no man's land to observe enemy actions. Finch's C Company received praise for its exceptional work in locating an enemy mortar, which had been attacking the Australian lines. On the 18th of December 1916, after having spent a week working and resting in billets behind the lines, Finch and the 36th Battalion once again returned to the freezing trenches. That night, members of the battalion conducted a number of patrols into no man's land to inspect wire fortifications placed in defence of the Australian positions. As they moved out of their trenches, the men came under heavy machine gun fire, and it is likely Finch was killed at this time. Herbert Finch was 21 years old. He had been at the front for 2 weeks. Today, his remains lie buried in the Cite Bongine military cemetery in France, where over 2,100 soldiers of the First World War now lie. His grave reads, "They will be done." Sergeant Herbert George Finch's name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Sergeant Herbert George Finch, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
lest we forget. We'll leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over, but in Australia they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.